Hey there, folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Interviews. I'm Arlyeon, and I'm here today with Evan Todd of Helvetica Scenario.
Hello.
So, basically, to kickstart most of our interviews, we just sort of ask some questions to get to know you better as a person. In this particular case, I suppose I'm just gonna ask, what are some favorite games you may have in general, as well as titles you've recently dived into?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, so I actually had never owned a console in my life, which is kind of an embarrassing thing. So I'm pretty much strictly PC. So I grew up on like Halo, Half-Life, Half-Life 2, um, that kind of stuff.
The bitter, salty tears of Half Life 3 never coming.
Uh, a sad tale. But yeah, recent games. Honestly, let's see, the most recently I've been getting into a lot more like local multiplayer. So there's a game called Treadnoughts by some of my friends. Um, it's like a local multiplayer tank game. Really, really fun. Um, yeah, I think that's probably the most recent.
Is it like a Scorched Earth type thing, or
Never played Scorched Earth, but yeah, it's 2D side on, really cartoony. You're these little tanks and you're just shooting at each other. It's very simple, but really fun.
if it's turn based, it's like Scorched
Oh, no, no,
Earth?
no, not turn-based. No, it's
Ah,
action. Yeah, it's real fast moving. But yeah, it's in early access right now, so they're working on getting it. I believe, well, I don't know if I'm not allowed to say this or whatever, but they're trying to get on Switch. So
I mean, there you go, folks. Whether or not he was allowed to say that,
I said it anyway.
but so other than that tidbit, I suppose I'd like to next go on to so development wise, what actually got you into that, and was it something you always wanted to do?
Oh boy. Yeah, I started making games when I was like 10 years old, and the way I did it was I started making websites, and then I realized, oh, you know what? I could make a game out of this website by creating an HTML table of images, and then changing the images using JavaScript, so I could make like a game board. And that was the first game I wrote, and I've been writing games ever since. I'm 26 now, so
A good 16
yeah,
years.
yeah, it's a
Uh,
decent run.
so how many other projects have you worked on prior to your most recent project, which is for those who in the audience weren't in the know, specifically his most recent project was the game Deceiver.
Yeah, it's hard to say because it's hard to. I mean, it depends on what you count as a project. So my only previous commercial release was called Lemma in 2015, and it's a first-person parkour in a sort of surreal voxely world. Um, and yeah, that came out on Steam. And but I've done a bunch of side projects and fun little games. And Train Jam, I did a Train Jam game. Did Ludum Dare, whatever, however you say that. uh, so yeah, I have a bunch of little ones.
So when it came to the project Deceiver, I'm not as note to editor, please get rid of the parts where I stumble over my words, please and thank you.
Nice.
So how did you meet the other members of the Deceiver team?
Oh, yeah. So one of them is Jack Menhorn. He did the sound for a lot of the sound for the combat gameplay, and I met him on TIG Source or TIG forums uh, back in geez, 2010, and
Wow.
I was working on Lemma at the time, and he saw it, and he sent me an email as you do when you're a composer or audio designer. You send emails to everyone, and if you're on TigSource and you have a game log, you tend to receive a lot of emails um, from composers. But this was the first one that I had ever received, and I didn't realize that that was how it worked. And so I was like, oh wow, a composer. Uh, and then it turned out he was super awesome. So yeah, that's how I met him. And he worked for about a month on the game and did a whole bunch of awesome work. And then he had to go work for V1, who are the guys who made the original Halo, and they're making something else right now, top secret, that I don't really know about. But so in between him working on Lawbreakers and secret
Rip.
new Halo thing, he worked on Deceiver for a month, and so I was very lucky.
Fair enough.
um, yeah, and then so when he took off, and I still had some more sound design and stuff to do, um, I got Logan Hayes, who is a composer and sound guy from. Uh, I'm from Ohio, and so Logan is also from Ohio. So I've met him at the meetups and different events and stuff, and we met up at GDC and everything. So and he turned out to be super awesome as well. So and then I think there were a couple people that did like some levels for the game, and I ended up having to rework all the levels. But some of the ideas for the levels were from random people. One of them was Ian Cussledge. He actually has a map that ships with TF2 now. Like Valve bought the map from him,
Huh.
and so I was impressed with him, and so I had him do some maps, and then I kind of used his work as a basis, and ended up kind of redesigning some of his stuff. But and then another one was Bob Pablo. He did a map. I worked with him like years and years ago, like 2008 or 9. And one of his maps that he did for an old game of mine, I pulled it into my new game, and it was actually pretty good. So I asked him, I was like, hey, can I use this in the new game? And he's like, yeah, sure. So yeah. And then the last thing is the voice actors for the trailer were one of the voice actors was one of my old coworkers. He does voice acting, and so I asked him if he could do some voice acting for the trailer, and he did an awesome job. And then I needed a female voice, and he had a friend who she does voice acting, and she was in Spellforce 3, and she turned out to do awesome as well. So basically, lots of awesome people.
I mean, sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, it was
So,
good.
is there anything that you would like to share with the audience, or words you may have for aspiring devs before we sort of get to the meat of this interview? And are there any indie projects that you've been following?
Yeah, I mean, I've been following a lot of indie stuff on TigSource. I'm following like Wobble Dogs looks really cool, and Return of the Overdin, of course, and some of those big ones, Hypnospace Outlaw, um, Moon Man, which is now Moon Quest. Um, yeah, the usual, the typical. Uh, but words of wisdom, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I am in a good place to give those right now.
I mean, experience is the best teacher, and you have a
Sure.
fair amount
Yeah.
of experience.
You those are good words of wisdom. You can, no matter what I say or what anyone tells you, like many things you just have to learn for yourself and just go through the struggle.
Okay, so this interview is slightly different, as you've mentioned that Deceiver, as you envisioned it, isn't actually going to happen, or rather, as
Correct.
you initially envisioned it. So this might
Yes.
be a bit closer to a post mortem. With that
Mm-hmm.
said, I'm sort of curious to know, what did you feel went really well with Deceiver and its development?
Uh, Honestly, the actual execution, like the details and everything, went really well. I'm happy with the way it looks, the way it plays. It's really fun. Um, the problem is that I uh, originally envisioned a large single player campaign, and that turned out to not be feasible technologically and like practically speaking. And so, but the multiplayer is like complete. And so what I'm gonna do right now is kind of rebrand it a little bit and just release the multiplayer only, and just throw it out there for free, because multiplayer indie games are multiplayer only indie games are just an incredibly tough sell right now,
Yeah.
unless you're doing free to play, and I don't want to do that.
So, would you care to elaborate on the technological aspect?
Yeah. Um, so the whole the whole story of this game and the original idea for this 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, was basically a hybrid single player and multiplayer game. Okay, so you're you're progressing through this linear story. I really like, BioShock is one of my favorite games, and I just enjoy like progressing through a story and feeling like you're getting somewhere and learning something, as opposed to an open world game that's just kind of like, yeah, just mess around. So, and there seems to be less games like that recently, and so I thought, yeah, let's make a single player linear story, but then in order to beat each level of the game, you have to you have to beat someone else playing online, is the idea. Okay, so if you're familiar with Dark Souls, it's like that, maybe,
Hmm.
where you're like, you know, you have this sort of single player campaign, but you can like invade other people. There's a little bit of multiplayer kind of hybrid thrown in there. So that was the idea. And then the um, the reason that it's called Deceiver was basically, you're progressing through this game, you're beating all these people online, you're thinking like, wow, I'm actually doing this. I'm playing against other players and actually beating them. And then you get to the end of the game, and you realize that all the other online players were actually bots the whole time. Okay, so the original idea of the game was to have no real multiplayer at all, and it would just, I would have fake usernames, fake pings, fake AFK, rage quitting people. Like, there would be no chat in the game, and so I wouldn't have to, like, write a chat bot or anything. Uh, but yeah, and it was all gonna be like very scripted. Like, first you're gonna play against this player, and his strategy is gonna be this, and then you're gonna play against that player, and it's like hard coded. His strategy is gonna be that, and then, you know, then you progress to the end of the game, and then through the story, it's a cyberpunk story, and it's very, uh, kind of philosophical and stuff. And so through the story, it kind of reveals to you that, hey, these are actually bots that you're playing against the whole time, and it's supposed to be kind of an M. Night Shyamalan mind blowing sort of moment. So that was the original plan. Well, then what happened was, it turns out that I made the game too complex. I mean, it's a shooter. It's very it's it's more complex than most shooters out there, because it's full 3D. You can crawl on the walls and ceilings. You can jump around. There's all kinds of upgrades and weapons, and there's things that you can build that kind of change the landscape of the map. So you can build these force fields and turrets and spawners and all kinds of stuff.
I'm a
And
terrible scrub and just really liked using the sniper rifle.
well, I'm right there with you. I love the sniper. Uh, but yeah, so it got so complex because I basically the failure of the game was that I got sidetracked making a fun multiplayer game, and uh, and then by the time that was finished, I looked back and I'm like, okay, now I have to execute on the core idea, which is making these bots for the game and making the story and everything. And it turned out that coding a bot, a convincing bot that can play a game of that complexity is currently, if not technically impossible, very, very, very difficult. So, and I was talking to, what happened was I went to GDC a couple weeks ago and I met up with, I was planning on using something called OpenAI to figure this out, to make a bot to play this game. And GDC, the first day I showed up, and like one of the first people I met, I just ran into this guy who worked at OpenAI. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to talk to you. So I showed him my game, and that's exactly what he told me. And I kind of was expecting it, but it was once he told me, like, listen, this is like a current area of research. This is an incredibly difficult problem. He gave me a quote unquote very low chance of success, and that's when I was like, okay, yeah, I think this is kind of dead in the water at this point. So that's the whole story.
Hmm. So, what engine were you first? I mean, just gonna double back there because it's like that took a little bit to sink in too, and that's like a shame because it's interesting when you have like those mind screws that subvert players. I mean, on one hand, like it would probably have taken some shenanigans to fool players for if they lost and then came across that same guy, unless you had a bunch of shuffles there just in case.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, concept wise, I'm always a big fan of like when you can successfully sort of play with players' expectations and the like, and having like the actual multiplayer game in the like game would have helped sell that sort of deceit to the
Mm-hmm.
players. Um, so yeah, I
Yeah, and
mean,
I was honestly a little like, I was like 50-50 about even talking about it um, on this interview, because it's an idea that I still want to explore and still could be possible if you start with a game that's designed for it, like a very simple game with a limited subset of actions that players can perform. Then it would be easier to write like a simple AI that would convince you that it's human, um, and and kind of focus on that aspect instead of getting sidetracked with making a crazy multiplayer shooter. So still something I want to explore.
I mean, programming the AI to teabag the player after it kills them would definitely help sell it.
Right, right. Well, so one of the things was, I watched a GDC talk about, I can't remember the name of the game, but it was a 2D, fighting game, like a Street Fighter type game. And they did this shadow AI, and sounded so simple. Of course, because it's a fighting game, there's a limited number of variables, but basically it just like replayed back it recorded the player's actions and played them back in the same scenario. So it was like, oh, hey, I'm at this position of the screen, or I'm this far from the enemy, I have this much health, and this is the last action that happened. Okay, in that scenario, what was the last thing that the player did? And then it just kind of looks it up and plays back that whole sequence. And so that was great because they didn't have to code in hardly anything, and the bots would actually do things like taunt the player and like teabag them or whatever, because the thing is just playing back what the player did. So you get all these crazy behaviors for free. So I'm interested in using something like that, but we'll see.
That's actually really neat. That would also be really disheartening if you had someone really good play the game and then like pass it off to their friend.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, what engine were you using to make the game?
Yeah, so it's all custom engine. From the ground up, I started with just C++, and it's built on OpenGL. So yeah, custom engine, really fun.
Wow. Wow, when you said C, I was like at first like expecting sharp, and it's like nope, plus plus. That's memories.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you mentioned that this game is cyberpunk. So, what was the inspiration for making this game? Like, how did it come to be? Is there any specific bits of literature, for instance, that might have helped you just sort of all those ideas percolate in your head into something coherent?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I had not really read anything cyberpunk before starting the project, but um, maybe like a couple months into like pre-production, I read Kierkegaard actually, and some Albert Camus. So I
So,
read
wait,
these
like the
two.
philosophers.
Yep, yeah, exactly. So that actually is where the the core ideas were coming from. And then like maybe a year and a half into development, I then finally read like Neuromancer and Snow Crash. And I it's weird because my idea of cyberpunk is more like Tron, and you can see it in the style of the game. I mean, it looks like Tron,
Yeah.
and which is more to me, it's more like clean lines. There's no poverty. It's it's more just like it's not really punk. It's just cyber. And so, whereas reading like Neuromancer, it's all everyone's poor or uh, you know, we're you're fighting against the system and
The
that kind of stuff.
Zaibatsu, the like mega corporations that basically own
Right.
everything.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about corporations and stuff. And I wasn't really into that as much. But there is some of it in the story in the end. Um, but yeah, kind of irrelevant now.
And that actually answered the next question I had, because I was going to ask about the visual aesthetic for it, and you've partly answered that it's sort of inspired by Tron.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that led to that specific visual style?
Yeah, it's hard to say because I've wanted to make a game with that style for like years. Like one of the games I worked on back over 10 years ago, I started out with this style of Tron lines, like glowing white lines and bright colors, transparency, stuff like that. And I started making the game that way, but I didn't have enough like artistic vision, I guess, or to borrow the terminology of Apple. I didn't have enough courage to pull it off, and so I just kind of tried to go with I traded it out for a more realistic aesthetic, and it ended up, of course, being terrible. So, but this time I was like, I'm sticking with it all the way through. I'm doing, solid colors and full saturation, bright white lines, and I stuck with it this time. So yeah.
So, to touch back on like some things we've been mentioning, it's the game as you envisioned it isn't going to occur, but there is
Hmm.
still going to be the multiplayer component release. So, can players expect any smaller patches or content releases?
Yeah, yeah, I am going to. It's been crazy because I've just been really busy, but there will be at least one more big patch, which will be I'm planning actually to rebrand the game since the story is gone now. The whole reason for the name Deceiver is kind of gone, and so I'm planning to like rebrand the game and just kind of release the multiplayer just for free, and then after the big release, I'm assuming I'll have some smaller patches that will just you know address the balance and different things. So yeah, there will be some patches. I keep promising as soon as I get time.
is there any hope for, you know, any sort of story update down the line? Not the immediate future, but
I not in this style of game, and not as I originally envisioned it, because the original plan was um, fully animated, voice acted characters. I had a whole animation system. I was able to do the character animations. I had character models, had voice actors lined up. It was all planned out. But none of that is going to happen in this game. But like I said, it is the concept of the game is something that I'm still very interested in exploring in a different way. That like because I think this game was basically, they say, have you ever heard people say like make the game that you want to play?
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is basically that, but like times 100, because it's basically Deceiver was basically like every game, like it checked all of my boxes that I look for in a game. Because like so many people these days play games and I just don't identify with them at all. Like people who play like free to play games, it's great, it's awesome that people like these games, or people who like play like for example League of Legends or something, and they're buying these skins and they're opening loot boxes or whatever, and like I just don't understand that at all. And then I don't know, there's lots of all pretty much all the games that are popular these days are, I've realized recently, like I don't typically finish, or it's not what I'm looking for in a gaming experience. Like the last game that I fully finished and completely enjoyed from start to finish was Hyper Light Drifter. Have you ever played that?
It's actually I own it. It's on my list of things to play, but
Oh man, it's fantastic.
I heard it
But
is.
it's that was like the last game that like pretty much checked my boxes, because it's a story. It's linear, well, kind of linear, um, and I don't know. It just that specific style of game, it doesn't. I don't see it a whole lot, and so anyway, I wanted to make a game that was that, and then I also enjoyed like multi. There's two types of games that I enjoy. Right, you have the single player, like you sit down for 8 hours, beat the game. Then there's the multiplayer that you log on for like 20 minutes every couple nights for a year. And those are the two types of things that I do basically. And so I ended up trying to shove all the things that I love into a single game, and that's it's the age old saying where it's do one thing well rather than 10 things poorly. And so I still would like to take that story concept, put it in a different setting, probably not even cyberpunk, and just explore the idea of, these are fake. And hilariously, someone, we have kind of a community of game devs in Ohio, and this guy was talking to me about this whole idea, and he told me, he kind of blew my mind and made me realize that the concept itself is really a horror concept. The idea that you're playing against something you think is human, and then it turns out it's not human, which is like classic horror. And I never realized that. Like, have you ever played Soma?
Yes.
Okay, you played, yeah. So that whole game is that concept of like what is human and what isn't human.
Transhumanism. Yeah.
Transhumanism, right? Which is really actually a really freaky concept. You've got like Deus Ex, which is not. It's more like an action game. Talks about transhumanism, but really it's a freaky concept, and it pairs with horror very well. And he told that to me, and I kind of was like, oh my gosh, this should have been a horror game, or kind of a thriller, I guess. It just changed the tone of the game a little bit right from the start, and that kind of flipped everything upside down for me. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
So, do you have a favorite moment of having either watched someone play or test the game, or even testing it yourself?
Yes, I do actually. I even have video of. So there was this one there was this one night when I was very close to getting multiplayer networking working, and getting two computers to talk to each other across the internet is actually an unbelievably difficult thing to do, especially when you're doing it from the ground up. Like, I mean, this was like UDP sockets and like, sending bits and bytes and crap. And so I was I was very close to getting that working, and I ended up staying up. I started streaming. Uh, I stream development on Twitch, and so I was streaming myself working on this game, and I ended up staying up till 4 in the morning, and a couple of these people in my Twitch watching my Twitch stream, you know, I was like, hey, I need to test this. Like, can I email this build to one of you and just see if it works? And I ended up, emailing a build to one of these guys watching in the Twitch chat, and it ended up, we had this whole saga. It took a while to get working and everything. Had to send a couple builds. I'll try this one, that kind of thing. And then finally it ended up working, and all of us on stream that were watching, they saw, oh look, he connected, it worked, and you could see him playing as well. And it was just that was really cool. Also, I think it was because I was up till 4 that like I was just completely like drunk on lack of sleep, and so it was a lot of fun. But the great also that it got caught on video is really really fun.
So actually, pursuing that for a second, are you going to continue with the whole game devery streams?
I would love to. Like I said, I have a job now, so I probably won't have as much time to do it. But to be fair, I wasn't streaming very consistently before either. So, but I do plan to continue to do game dev streams when I can. I would love to.
Alrighty, and with all of that said and done, are there any projects that you're now aiming towards working on, whether it be in the near or far future? You've mentioned wanting to resume work on something so that you can incorporate the story you'd originally envisioned for Deceiver, but is there any other projects that you're
Oh
plotting
yes.
towards?
Oh yes. Everyone has, a backlist, right? So yeah, I have lots of ideas. The other main one that I'm interested in is are you familiar with Overcooked?
The cooking game? Like the little
Yes.
cooking. Yeah, my
Yes.
fiance has it.
Uh, Local multiplayer, yeah. Local co-op. Yeah, I want to make a better version, which is people are people have codenamed Undercooked. So we'll see. I would like to work on something like that. So yeah.
Alright, well, I suppose that addresses most of the topics here. Uh, was there anything specifically, I suppose, post-mortem wise regarding Deceiver that you feel could be addressed?
Um, it's hard because I'm still, I think, like in the middle of it, but I am planning on writing an article that kind of goes through what we just talked about, and um, sort of the project management failures that I encountered. Um, but yeah, I think I probably won't be able to fully articulate, what happened and what could be taken away from it until maybe a year from now. But yeah, we'll see.
Okay. Well, in that case, I may as well address where people can find you for future projects. So first off, those folks in the audience, you'll be able to find Deceiver on Steam. For news, there's at Deceiver Game on Twitter. There's also the Deceiver website, as well as Helvetica Scenario's official website, both of which will be linked in the description. You also mentioned you had a Twitch.
Mm-hmm. Yep, twitch.tv/Evan Todd. And it's pretty much all programming.
And there will be a link to that inside the description as well. Is there anywhere else you'd care to send people?
Uh, no, yeah, that's good.
All right. Well, in that case, I would like to thank you for actually sitting down and talking with me about this, and also just some of the background details on the game itself. It was, I'll admit, when there was the whole thing of, for technical reasons, that it like completely piqued my curiosity for ages, and it drove me nuts.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting story. But yeah, Jay, I appreciate the opportunity here. Appreciate it very much.
It was wonderful to hear from you, and it was nice to be able to work with you on this. And whenever you actually do start working on a new project, it'd be fun to touch base with you again and hear about it.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be awesome.
In
Definitely
the
stick
interim,
around.
for those who are watching, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to like and comment and subscribe. Click the little bell button. Also, sharing is caring, both for the sake of helping people discover this channel as well as the indie projects that are covered on it. Anyways, I'll catch you folks next time.